From the Journals of Dipper Pines, Wednesday, June 19th, it's pretty late at night, and I'm continuing to write this as I sit up in bed with a flashlight focused on the page. Mabel is asleep and snoring on the other side of the curtain, though she swears she never snores, and since the noise alone would keep me from sleeping, I might as well finish the entry for today. I'd never heard of anything called the Gak of Doom, or Creepy Hollow for that matter. Schmebulok clammed up when Mabel and I asked questions, and Jeff refused to answer, claiming that we'd had our dozen pies worth already. Once we got back to the shack, I dived into the journals but found no references to either of the two terms. Meanwhile this afternoon, Grunkle Stan came over to visit for an hour or so, and right away Mabel hit him up for some money. Then after Stan had left, Mabel called Greasy's Diner and ordered the pies from Lazy Susan, who was thrilled with the order. She does make good pies, but I think SHE thought they were for Grunkle Stan, whom she still sort of wants to marry. After she hung up, Mabel said Susan had told her the way to a man's heart was through his stomach, although Mabel added, "I'd think it would be right through the sternum. Course, you'd need an axe." Anyhow, once the call was made, Mabel got out her yarn and needles and started knitting a sweater. I knew that would keep her busy for the rest of the day. So at about 4 I borrowed Wendy's old bicycle, which she keeps here at the shack, and rode over to the McGucket mansion. I found Grunkle Stan and Ford out back, both of them wearing Hawaiian shirts and lounging beside the pool, arguing about something or other. I used to worry about all the quarreling they do until I realized that's just their way of kidding. It's what they do instead of awkward sibling hugs. Fiddle Ford was nowhere to be seen. Grunkle Stan said he mostly stays in his lab these days. For a while I just sat between my grunkles, staring into the rippling blue water, smelling its chlorine aroma, and thinking. Finally, Grunkle Stan got up, stretched, and said it was too hot and he was going inside for a nap. That gave me a chance to talk to Ford about what we'd learned without Stan getting all protective. "Grunkle Ford," I started, "what do you know about Creepy Hollow?" He shrugged. "Just the name, really. That's one of the places I always meant to investigate, but somehow I never quite got around to it. It's a small bowl-shaped valley, and it runs from Breaker's Ridge right up to the base of the bluffs west of town. That is unfortunately just about all I know for sure. The townspeople shun it because they have a silly superstition that visiting it brings bad luck. I gather there's some supernatural activity of a low order that's common in the Hollow." "Low order? What's that?" He shifted his weight in the sun chair. "Well, merely illusions and the like, nothing as real and solid as a gremlin or a unicorn. You know what a will-o'-the-wisp is? Kind of a light phenomenon, isn't it? Like, in the Middle Ages in Europe, travelers at night would see dim lights and think they were lanterns held by other people, but when they tried to approach the lights, the glows would flitter off farther and farther until the travelers got completely lost." "Something like that, yes," Grunkle Ford said. "Mischievous, you see, but not actually dangerous. Well, in Creepy Hollow people say you see shapes around you, nothing with a definite physical body, just vague shapes, shadowy and strange. But you can only glimpse them in your peripheral vision. When you look directly at them, they're just not there. And these visions are supposed to make those who see them jumpy and prone to bad decisions. However, as I told you, I've never witnessed any of that myself. What with our discovery of the crashed and buried alien ship and our work on the portal, Fiddle Ford and I never found time to look into the Creepy Hollow phenomena." "Why? Are you thinking of exploring?" "Well, yeah, sort of," I confessed. I'd say you'd be safe enough if you went during daylight and got out of there before sunset. You'd have to remember to pay no attention to anything you might think you see or hear in there. Illusions can't really harm you, but they might cause you to bring harm on yourself by, accidentally walking off a cliff while being distracted, for instance. Would you want to go with me?" He chuckled. "If I were 20 years younger, I'd jump at the chance, Dipper. However, I've come to dislike strenuous long hikes with no definite goal in mind. And at the moment, I'm very busy writing up an account of our voyage in the Stand-O War and my analysis of the Pacific anomalies we discovered. I'm afraid I'll have to take a pass this time." "Hey, look at that!" You see those only in Gravity Falls?" I looked where he was pointing. One of the orange butterflies was surfing the breezes a few feet overhead, bobbing along as it rose and fell. There's a lot of them around this year. We saw some in the Gnome Grove, I told him. Yes, they're fond of wooded areas. They're not monarchs, you know, Ford said, though they superficially resemble them. That's a kind of butterfly called a fritillary, I said, watching the butterfly swoop away over the privacy fence and out of sight. Ford chuckled. You're quite a reader. It always surprises me that you know so much about so many things. You remind me of me when I was your age. Dipper, any time you want to reconsider being my apprentice, let me know. I may have slowed down, but I have no plans to retire. Thanks, I said. After a moment, he murmured, Creepy Hollow. Funny. It's been over 30 years since I've even thought about the name. How did you even hear about that place, anyway? I told him that Mabel and I had talked to the gnomes. He threw his head back and roared with laughter. Yes, I investigated the gnomes and got to know several of them pretty well. Dipper, a word of advice, gnomes really aren't too bright. They have a sort of hive mind, if you know what that is. Like bees. Most of them have to be told what to do and when to do it. The few brighter ones control all the others, and like bees they have a central ruler who keeps them all focused. Any individual gnome will invariably mislead you, not by intentionally lying exactly, but by telling you things that he or she mistakenly believes to be true. I sort of know that. Anyway, if Mabel and I want to explore Creepy Hollow, that would be all right? Grunkle Ford thought for a few minutes. I believe so. But please don't tell Stanley. You know how he frets about these things. Of course, he'd blame me if he knew you were going, as if I could stop you if you're really determined. So just be careful. And remember what I said, if you go at all, get there in the morning after the sun is well up, and make sure you return at least an hour before it sets. Illusionary phenomena always seem stronger and realer at night. I promised that I would follow his advice, and that if Mabel and I went exploring, I'd report back to him. Before I left, Grunkle Ford thanked me for giving him copies of his 3 journals. Now that Bill Cipher's gone for good, I don't really need them, he told me, but it's good to have them again. When you told me Bill had incinerated the originals, I thought they were gone forever. One day you and Mabel are going to have to sit down and tell me the whole story of how this Blendin Blandin character and the Time Baby were able to rescue them from the past. I told him I would and then got up to leave. So I rode back to the shack with a lot to think about. I suppose Grunkle Ford's right. Whatever it is that scares a gnome shouldn't bother a normal human at all. But when I think about normal human, I also have to think, and then there's Mabel. On Thursday morning, Mabel came bouncing downstairs and into the dining room where Grunkle Ford, Grunkle Stan, Seuss, his abuelita, and Melody were just sitting down for breakfast. Grunkle Stan chuckled. Full of pep this morning, pumpkin? You betcha. Mabel trilled. Don't get up, Melody, I'll get my own cereal. She bustled into the kitchen, hesitated between a box of overly sensitive all cocoa clusters and paranoid panda choco vanilla doubles, and then poured a bowl half and half of each. She splashed in some milk, poured herself some juice, and went back to claim her place next to Stan. You look especially pretty today. New sweater, Mabel? Melody asked. Yeah, thanks for noticing. Mabel hopped up onto her chair, held out her arms, and modeled. The sweater was a deep purple, the orange butterfly design on it contrasting nicely. Good job, dog, Seuss said. You're, like, aces at knitting. You certainly have an eye for detail. Very accurate depiction of Beloria viridida, Ford observed. Mabel curtsied before hopping off the chair and sitting down again. Thank you, Grunkle Ford. She tilted her head and made a face of bewilderment. Also, wah? Poindexter always uses French to show off, Stan said with a grin. Stanley, it isn't French. That's the scientific name of the Gravity Falls variety of Pacific fritillary, Ford said in a huffy voice. It's a species of butterfly. Odd. Dipper brought up the subject of those insects just yesterday. Speaking of which, where is Dippy? Grunkle Stan asked. Not like him to miss breakfast. Mabel had been industriously shoveling sweet cereal into her mouth. She paused, chewed crunchily, and swallowed. He's sleeping in, I think. He was up crazy late last night writing in his, she crooked her fingers into air quotes, journal. He's top keen this investigation of his really serious, Stan said. Maybe we should go on a family outing to get his mind off it. Trust me, nothing good's gonna come of his trying to learn what happened to Mrs. McGucket. Oh, Sousa's grandmother said, that poor woman. Mabel blinked. Do you know something about her, Abuelita? The old woman sadly shook her head. I did not know her, but I heard about her. Mr. McGucket, he went wrong in the head. They fought over nothings. And then one day she just vanished from their house. So sad. Ford sighed and poked at his scrambled egg with a fork. I blame myself. After Fiddleford walked out on his job, I should have followed up. But I was just so obsessed with my work then, I'll never ignore a friend's pain again. Dipper still had not come downstairs when they finished breakfast, and Melody and Sousa's abuelita wouldn't hear of Mabel's offer to wash or dry the dishes. Okay, she said. Then I'm gonna go out for a little bit. Sous, if Dipper asks, tell him I'm gonna be where we went yesterday. Will do, Hambone, Sous said. Have fun. As she sped toward the gift shop door, Mabel almost collided with Wendy, who took a step back, laughing. Hey, Mabel, chill, girl. Don't mow me down. Sorry. Mabel said, skidding to a halt. Hey, Wendy, if Seuss forgets, tell Dipper I'm going to the same place we went yesterday, okay? You got it. Nice threads, dude. Thank you. Mabel said, holding the front of her sweater out and looking down admiringly at the butterfly. It's a baloney very titi. Could have fooled me, man. I thought it was a butterfly. Chow. No thanks, already ate. Full of sugar and pep, Mabel sped off around the corner and into the woods near the shack. It was a fine cool morning, with the sun shining down through a thin, high overcast so that shadows lay blurred and soft beneath the trees. The birds were busy, chirps and cheeps rang out on all sides, and a few squirrels skittered off the path ahead of her now and then. One of them completely lost his little furry mind and couldn't decide which side of the path would be safest, so he spun in an insane little circle, increasingly frantic, until Mabel just stopped and pointed to the right. That way! The squirrel stopped, looked at her, and immediately ran off to the left. Mabel laughed. Good for you. Always choose your own path. Then she hurried on, humming a tune. She passed the glade where, if you did the right chant in the right low-register voice, you could visit the unicorns. She didn't even give it a passing glance, but muttered, jerks, under her breath as she passed by. Once unicorns had been her absolute favorite animals, but after having talked with them, bargained with them, been fooled by them, and fought them, her admiration for them had faded. At the moment she thought the orange butterflies were much cooler. She came to the site of the old McGucket house and walked over to the edge of the depression. Looking down through the tangled vines that had twined around the fallen timbers, she could glimpse evidence of the old fire, nearly shapeless charred remains of crisscrossed beams and joists, crumbly black and streaked with white ash. Pale white toadstools had sprouted on some, and under it all was the greenish surface of stagnant standing water. Mabel closed her eyes and tried to imagine the house as it must have looked before the fire. It would have been small, but foundations of ruined houses always look smaller than the buildings themselves. She pictured it as two-storied, or maybe a lower floor and an upper loft. That would be where Tate McGucket would have slept. Maybe as a little boy he'd spend anxious frightened nights up there, hearing his parents' voices speaking in low but furious tones as they fought. Maybe he pulled the covers over his head and wept and shivered in the dark. Mabel sighed. She'd been there when Fiddleford McGucket had begun to recover his lost memories. She remembered how he stood there, just starting to understand his past and the fears he had been desperate to forget. She had felt the waves of despair radiating off the poor old man like heat. The sun broke through the high clouds, and a warming beam struck her. She took a deep breath and opened her eyes, and then laughed her gurgling chuckle. The orange butterflies, a whole flock of them, air-danced up on the crown of the ridge behind the house, right on the edge of gnome territory. She hurried up, her feet slipping in the dewy grass, until she stood in the midst of the whirling cloud. "Hello, baloney varieties," she yelled, raising her arms and spreading her fingers. To her delight, the butterflies seemed to be attracted to her sweater. Some alighted on the sleeves, one on her shoulder, and 5 or 6 on the big knitted image of their kind. "That's right," she said. "I made a picture of you. Who's the cutest little butterfly species in Gravity Falls?" "You are." She felt a tickle. One of the butterflies had lit on her left hand, on the tip of her index finger. Cautiously, slowly, she lowered her hand so she could look at it close up. It had a long, spring-like proboscis, deep purple faceted eyes, nearly the same shade as her sweater, and wings that lazily folded and unfolded. It began to creep along her finger and then down the back of her hand, and Mabel leveled it so she could continue to study the insect. Even more of them were landing on her now. She could feel some clinging in her hair, and her sweater was almost completely orange with a coating of live butterflies. "There are a lot of you, aren't there? Ouch." Involuntarily she shook her hand, and the butterfly on it flew off. At the same time all the others leaped into the air and bobbed away in an orange airborne stream winding into the forest. The back of her hand throbbed a little. Had the butterfly bitten her? How could it have? It didn't have a real mouth, just that tube-like proboscis for slurping up nectar. But the back of her hand had an angry pink welt on it. "Maybe I'd better go back to the shack for some antibiotic," she thought. She ought to go. And yet she didn't want to go. The sun felt warm, the air made her pleasantly drowsy, the woods were shady, a good place for a quick nap. She'd feel better if she just went into the forest and found a nice mossy bank to lie on. "Just a little way in, Mabel." It was as if someone in a dream had called her name. She looked down the hill. A boy was climbing toward her. She frowned and then, after a short mental struggle, recognized him. "Dipper," she murmured. He caught up to her. "Are you out of your mind? You heard Jeff, it's dangerous to go that way. What's wrong with you?" She hid her left hand behind her back. Nothing. Want to go to find the Gak of Doom? I feel like going there." "Not today," Dipper snapped. "We'd have to prepare. I need to make a checklist, get supplies and weapons ready. Hey, where's your grappling hook?" You never go into the woods without it. Why are you so pale? Have you got a fever? Come on, I think you might be a little sick." Okay." Dipper took her right hand and led her downhill. She kept her left concealed from him, without really knowing why. But as they made their way back to the path that led to the mystery shack, as the pain eased into a kind of tingle, she took a quick look at it. The pink mark was fading, but it was leaving a sort of dark purply black outline. A little triangle. From the journals of Dipper Pines, I didn't know what was wrong with Mabel. She talked and acted oddly, well, she always does, but I mean oddly even for her. It was like, I don't know, like she was sedated or something, or feeling disoriented and far away. She talked in such a low voice that I could hardly understand her, and she moved like she was sleepwalking. I was so worried that by the time I got her down the hill, I called Grunkle Ford and asked if he could drive to meet us. We followed the old drive to the highway. It wasn't all that far, really, but the brush was really overgrown, chest-high and tangled. Mabel kept fretting about butterflies. "Where are they?" she wailed more than once. I don't mean she shrieked, because it was all in that weird soft voice, but she sounded miserable. "I don't know," I told her. And it was true. We saw a dozen or so butterflies, but they were the wrong kinds, black ones with orange and white spots, brown ones, yellow ones, some small white ones, but none of the orange ones with the dark brown markings. Mabel had to be pulled along, but at least she didn't struggle. We got to the highway and started to walk toward town. We spooked a deer that was grazing on the shoulder of the roadway, and we saw some rabbits. Ordinarily Mabel would coo and ooh and ah over wildlife like that and even try to pet them. I mean, once she even tried to smuggle a young bobcat into our family car. But she just stared dully at them as we passed by. We had been walking along the side of the road for only a few minutes when I heard a car engine, and a moment later Grunkle Ford's black Lincoln came over a rise. He was at the wheel, and Grunkle Stan was beside him in the passenger seat. Grunkle Ford pulled over, I led Mabel across the road, and with Grunkle Stan's help we got her into the back seat. I climbed in beside her, trying to answer both Stan's and Ford's questions. What had happened? Was she hurt? Had there been an accident? No, I said when they finally quieted down enough to listen. She's sick or something. I don't know. She's not acting like herself. Wanna go back, Mabel muttered. Her eyes looked heavy. In a few minutes she nodded off to sleep. Take us over to Historichville, Grunkle Stan said. They have a walk-in clinic. Hit Route 35 and turn south. I know, Stanley, Grunkle Ford snapped. I lived here for years, you know. It took about half an hour to drive there. The whole time I just sat in the back seat beside my sister and worried. The doctor had a French name, Dr. Jean Lefevre, but he sounded American. Call me Johnny. Everybody does. He was young, probably in his early 30s, with tousled, wavy black hair and bright blue eyes. Any other time, Dipper thought, Mabel would be gushing over him and developing a crush. But she remained apathetic. Dr. Lefevre listened to her breathing and her heart, looked into her eyes and used a tongue depressor to stare into her mouth, felt the nodes under her jaws, and took her temperature. Doesn't seem to be much wrong, he said. In fact, I can't really find anything. I'd say take her home, put her to bed, and let her rest for a day. Call me tomorrow if she's not any better. I suspect this is one of those childhood maladies that goes as quickly as it comes on. Watch what she eats, no heavy or rich food today, maybe soup if she feels like it, plenty of water. No milk or dairy today, just in case it's an intolerance issue. I wonder, is she allergic to anything? Just pollen in the spring and then again in the fall, Dipper told him. When the doctor raised his eyebrows, Dipper explained, we're twins. Our allergies act up together. The doctor chuckled, looking at our granduncles. Twins run in your family, I see. He did a double take. Except one of these gentlemen has polydactyly. For the first time Mabel showed a spark of interest. Polydactyl doodle all day, she murmured, giggling a little. Then she just stared into space, her head sort of wobbly. I do have an extra finger on each hand, Grunkle Ford said. I've seen a few cases, the doctor said. It's not as uncommon as you would think. About 1 in 3,000. Yeah, but Mabel's gonna be all right? Grunkle Stan said impatiently. I think so. Kids are tougher than you think. But I see she has the normal complement of 5 fingers, and so does her brother. Wait, what's this? Dipper felt the breath catch in his throat. Dr. Lefevre had taken Mabel's left wrist in his hand. On her skin Dipper now saw a black outline of a triangle. Just like in the photo of Mrs. McGucket. Mabel looked as if she were trying to focus. She giggled again. That's where a butterfly bit me, she said. Like the one on my sweater. Only then did it register with Dipper that the butterfly's orange wings, superficially similar to a monarch's orange wings, had odd markings. In a semicircle at the rear of each hindwing brown spots were curved in a line, 6 on each wing. Each spot was a perfect brown equilateral triangle. In the car as they drove back to Gravity Falls, Dipper said, it's Bill's symbol. He might be back. From behind the wheel, Grunkle Ford said, don't jump to conclusions, Dipper. Bill was erased from this dimension. He can't be here, certainly not physically, and I don't think even in the dreamscape. Anyway, these triangles lack the eye symbol. I don't believe they're related to Bill. Still, I wish I knew more about these butterflies. I'd like to examine a specimen. Preston Northwest, growled Grunkle Stan. I beg your pardon? Preston Northwest. That rich jerk collects butterflies. He probably has some pinned up and on display. I might go visit him. Grunkle Stan laughed. Yeah, good luck with that, Poindexter. Northwest wouldn't give you the scrapings off his shoes after walking through a stable. Pacifica might, Dipper said. Huh? Their daughter, you know. At the end of last summer, she came over and gave us birthday gifts. I haven't seen her this year, but I think she feels kind of friendly toward Mabel. I could ask her. That's actually a good idea, Grunkle Ford said. Do you know where they live now? No. Of course the Northwests had moved out of their mansion, they'd had to sell it after losing most of their wealth, and the newly rich Fiddleford McGucket had bought it, but Dipper hadn't been in touch with Pacifica. They owned a farm about 3 miles out of town on the High Bluff Road. They used to raise ponies there. They've moved to the farm full-time. Do you want me to drive you? Dipper thought. No, I think I'd rather borrow Wendy's bike. Attract less attention, you know? We'll take Mabel back to Fiddleford's. There's plenty of room there, and Stan can get her settled. Then I'll drive you over to the shack so I can pick up some clothes for Mabel, and you can take it from there. Stan shifted in his seat and pulled out a wallet. He pulled out a sheaf of bills. Stop at the bike shop, he said, half turning in the seat to hand the money to Dipper. Let Dip at least get a boy's bike. This isn't like you, Grunkle Stan, Dipper said, feeling a little dazed, as though Stan's offer of money had been a sock full of damp sand and had hit him a good one upside his head. Meh, Stan said with a shrug. I ain't buyin' fancy schmancy electronics to fix a portal these days, and I got plenty. But be sure you bring me back the change. Dipper relaxed a little. That sounded more like Grunkle Stan. An hour later, seated on his shiny new 12-speed, Dipper pedaled along High Bluff Road, a winding country road lined on either side with old-growth trees. Once he had to pull way over as a logging truck grumbled past, but otherwise he saw very little traffic. After 3 miles, the trees fell away to the right, and he saw the farmhouse and paddocks in a broad meadow. Yikes! The Northwests were no longer the richest people in town, but they'd salvaged a lot. From the look of it, the farmhouse wasn't a modest affair, but a rambling, rustic 3-storied house with a long drive bordered by flower beds. The stables didn't look occupied at first, but then Dipper heard the sound of hoofbeats and saw Pacifica in a paddock beyond the barn, riding a white pony. No one else seemed to be around. Dipper rode down the drive and up to the fence. Pacifica, dressed in riding togs and helmet, was on the far side of the paddock. She made the turn, and as she urged the pony into a trot she finally noticed him. Her eyes flew wide open, but she reined the pony in and walked it over to the fence. Dipper, she said, looking down on him. I didn't know you were back in town. For the summer, Dipper said. You're looking good, Pacifica. Well, of course, she said. But she swung off the pony and led him toward the stables. I've got to have him rubbed down, she said. Meet you inside. Dipper went around to the front of the stable and stepped into the cool, dim interior as he heard Pacifica saying, Give him a good rub-down, Phillips. Yes, miss, came an elderly voice, and Dipper saw a scrawny-looking, short old man leading the pony into a stall. Pacifica walked toward him, taking off her fawn-colored riding gloves. I've just gone one now, she said. Dipper smiled. Most kids don't have any. At last Pacifica broke down and smiled back. Well, that's one way of looking at it. It's good to see you, Dipper told her. I don't mind seeing you either. Where's Mabel? That's why I came out, Dipper said. She's kind of sick. He sketched in part of the story for her, leaving out the investigation but telling Pacifica that the doctor wondered if Mabel were allergic to something, and the only new thing she'd been exposed to seemed to be the butterfly. Grunkle Ford wants to look at a specimen, he finished. We thought maybe your dad might have one. I'm sure he does, Pacifica said. She checked the time on her cell phone. Father and Mother are away for a few hours. It's good you picked this time to come. All of Father's butterfly collections are stored away. Come with me and we'll see if we can find one. You know what it looks like? Dipper nodded. She led him into the house. I understand that Hillbilly bought our old place, she said in a cool voice. Fiddleford McGucket, yes. Dipper hesitated and then added, Grunkle Ford and Grunkle Stan are house guests there this summer. They took Mabel there to keep an eye on her. He looked at the floor. I'm sorry. Why? She asked, sounding genuinely surprised. It's just a house. My parents liked it a lot better than I did. This place is better, if you ask me. Just as comfortable, smaller, and I'm close to my pony. She had led him up to the second floor. These are my rooms, she said. Come on in. Rooms, plural. Pacifica had a little suite, a sitting room, a dressing room, a bedroom, and a closet about the same size as the attic at the shack. You wait here while I change, she said. Dipper settled into a chair in the sitting room. He heard the sound of a shower, then some minutes of rustlings and movement. When Pacifica opened the door again, she was wearing gray leggings, tan ankle boots, and the cream-colored llama's hair sweater that Mabel had given her during Weirdmageddon. Okay, I kind of like the dumb sweater, she said. Then she smiled a little. Tell her that, will you? Of course. They went up to the top floor, and in an expansive storage room Pacifica located dozens of framed shadow boxes, each containing a display of a dozen or more butterflies. Some were exotic, huge insects from South America or Asia or Africa, and others were more modest, displays of red admirals, swallowtails, Luna moths, and other American species. Finally, Dipper spotted a frame with a brass label that read Forest Butterflies of Oregon. The center one in the top row looked exactly like the one Mabel had knitted on the front of her sweater. This is it. Take it, Pacifica said. She bit her lip. I don't know if I can, mind, but if I can manage it, do you think Mabel would let me come and see her? Sure she would, Dipper said. Hey, she actually likes you. Oh, Pacifica said. Then, in a strangely choked voice, she said, well, you better go before my parents get back. Don't worry, they won't miss that. I'll get a bag for you to put it in. Tell Mabel I said hi, okay? And I'll come and see her if I can. She'd like that, Dipper said. The bag Pacifica found was a canvas carryall with leather straps and a designer's name stitched onto it. It probably cost more than his bike had. They wrapped the frame in tissue, taped it, and slipped it into the bag. It fit into the bike basket just fine. Well, Dipper said, thank you. Standing next to the bike with her arms crossed, Pacifica said, oh, don't mention it. I don't like the butterfly collections. They look creepy to me. Pacifica shifted her weight from foot to foot awkwardly for a moment, then as if on impulse hugged Dipper, her breath warm against his neck. Tell Mabel that, say I like her too. Now get out of here, will you? Though she gave him a little shove before she turned and ran back into the farmhouse, Dipper didn't climb onto the bike right away. His face felt hot for some reason. She hugged me, he thought. How about that?